Welcome to LSB Feaster's Radio Aircheck and Classic TV channel.
In the month of December, I like numbers like 22, 23, 24, which is really bingo at my house, and even 25. It's really when you get a chance to play with all the toys is December 25. How very, very sad it is. How very sad it is to hear somebody say, Christmas is for kids. Well, of course it is. Of course Christmas is for kids. It's the most important day of the entire year. It's more important than your birthday. Christmas? Of course it's for kids. But you see, everybody has a chance to be a kid again on Christmas. One of the great things about Christmas is no matter how much of a Grinch you are, no matter how much of a grump you are, no matter how much of a Scrooge you are, you're allowed, if you so desire, to go back for one, maybe 2 or 3 days if you can squeeze it, and be a kid again. And nobody will hold it against you. Everybody will believe you. It's kind of tough to suddenly wake up one morning in August and say, hey, I think I'm going to act like a kid today. People look at you kind of strange. They shouldn't, but they do. But when you get towards the end of December and you start counting off the days in increments of 20, yeah, it's okay to be a kid again. You see, adults don't enjoy Christmas. Adults are too damned wrapped up in their own importance to appreciate Christmas. I mean, adults don't appreciate twinkling lights. They don't squeal when they see twinkling lights. How the hell can you squeal and love twinkling lights when you're, worried about some deal that you listen for things like sleigh bells? Come on, when was the last damn time you sat there and listened for sleigh bells or the prancing of 8 tiny reindeer hooves on your roof? No, you're too busy. You don't have time for that kind of stuff. So unfortunately, you never hear them. You can't hear sleigh bells and you can't hear the prancing of reindeer hooves if you don't listen for them. They're very, very delicate. And they require real concentration. But you will hear them if you take the time. When was the last time you wrote a letter to Santa? I'm dead serious. Oh, probably most of you are 8, 9, 10, maybe 11 or 12 years old. You haven't written to the old guy since. Why not? Why haven't you written to him? Yeah, now probably if you wrote to him, you'd make it a big, long list of, oh, Santa, bring me this. Oh, Santa, bring me that. Well, why not sit down and just write the old guy a letter? A letter from one friend to another. We're calling him on the phone. Mary talked to him this week. It was just the other night. I was feeling a little bit down and out, to tell you the truth. I was worried that maybe I hadn't been good enough this year and that my old buddy Santa Claus was feeling kind of bad about it and might, take it out on me. And Mary said, well, I'll call. And so she called Santa's house, and then she had a hell of a time getting through. The guy's really busy at this time of the year, Finishing touches on the toys, loading up the sleigh, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But she said, I'm calling because I want to talk to Santa about Bobby Lassiter. And yeah, he recognized my name right away. We've been old buddies for a long, long time. Santa and I go back a very long time. Now, some people think that it's silly to believe in Santa Claus. They point out that, well, you'll get your presents anyway, even if you don't. Well, maybe you will get them anyway, even if you don't. But what you don't get when you don't believe in Santa Claus is the joy of knowing that the presents are from him. For some strange reason, as you grow older, it just doesn't come as easy. You start to ask questions that are none of your damn business. You start looking into places that you shouldn't be looking into, and then you start questioning as to whether or not Santa Claus is real. Well, I admit that it wasn't always easy. I also admit that it doesn't always make sense that a man and his elves would go all over the world and go to all of that trouble. There are a lot of people around that will argue that there are too many boys and girls in the world and not enough time, and there are all kinds of reasons why Santa Claus couldn't go from here to there, and who cares? I can't explain how it's done. Nobody can explain how it's done. I'm not Santa Claus. Only he knows how it's done. Only he knows who is helping him out. The fact of the matter is, if you don't want to believe in Santa Claus, you don't have to. Somebody's going to twist your arm. Santa's not going to take away your toys. He's not going to put any coal in your stocking. You don't have to believe in Santa Claus. He'll understand. You think you're the first little boy or the first little girl that suddenly decided for whatever strange reason to stop believing in Santa Claus? Do you think you're the first? You're not. Almost all the boys and girls in this world at one time or another have stopped believing in Santa Claus, at least for a while. Like I said, he understands. Of course, his feelings are hurt. But he'll understand. He knows that it's very hard to believe. He knows that you really have to work at it. I mean, look at me. I'm 43 years old. I believe in Santa Claus. I don't believe in anything else. And I didn't always believe in Santa Claus. But I sure do now. I mean, if there isn't any Santa Claus, how is it that a grown man who doesn't take anything from anybody, who doesn't believe in anything, could possibly believe in Santa Claus? And would you answer that for me if you possibly can? Of course, there's no answer. Except that Santa Claus is real. About the only guy in the whole wide world that can forgive you for whatever it is that you may be doing wrong. When was the last time you broke out spontaneously in a chorus of Santa Claus is coming to town? Or Jingle Bells? Just to yourself. Not because there was some organized effort to sing Christmas carols going on. Just to yourself. You see, adults think of Christmas as a lot of hard work and a lot of expense and a lot of trouble. Oh, whoa, Christmas is for kids. That's the way adults look at Christmas. Only people who are literally out of touch with reality would think about the hard work and the expense and the trouble. But then have you ever met an adult? Have you really ever met an adult who was in touch with reality? Adults don't swipe licks of icing from a newly frosted cake. Only kids do that. Adults don't do that. But the icing on a cake, that's reality. Adults don't scuff their shoes while they're playing with a toy on the floor, making noises, going, Adults never get grass stains from romping out in the backyard. Adults never find the time to think thoughts like these. Too bad. Because these are the things that reality are made of. Some of us are lucky enough to be able to return to the real world for at least a few days a year, around about the end of December, right around Christmas time. I guess the rest of the year is another story. The rest of the year isn't filled with reality. The rest of the year is filled with all kinds of silly nonsense. The rest of the year is filled with thoughts of career and all that other junk. Getting one foot up on somebody else. You know the story. Very little reality in the rest of the year. Promised to take you home to my place for Christmas this year, like I did last. And I promised to introduce you around. Now, my family is probably a lot like yours, and as a matter of fact, you may recognize a lot of my family and your family and vice versa. Probably the best place to start would be Christmas 1988. It's my 44th Christmas. Surprisingly enough, I remember most of them. This year, Married to the Tree. It's usually a little more of a joint effort than this year, but this year, Married to the Tree and I, like most Middle American males, documented the trimming of the tree with my Christmas present to myself, the video cam. And sent off the tape because, of course, we'd never look at anything like that. I mean, that's kind of silly, taking videotapes of the tree, but we sent it off to people that we knew for a fact would treasure it and would return it to us one day, to Mary's parents. They won't see it until Christmas Eve because there's a big note on the videotape that says, "Do not play until Christmas Eve." And it's a whole big production, almost an hour long. It's one of those video letters home, the kind of silly thing that you do when you first get a video cam. And I can't think of anything better than to send it off to a parent, someone who, even at this stage in their child's life, will treasure it and put it away in someplace special and make sure that some point down the line when a closet is being cleaned out or an attic or a basement, someone will come across it and say, "Wow." Of course, I went overboard again this year on the gifts. I always do. It doesn't make any difference. Wasn't that long ago, 3, 4, 5 Christmases back, I only had about $50 to spend for Christmas, and I ended up spending $58. I went way overboard. Everything's relative. I have a few more dollars this year, but I went way overboard. Got my fingers crossed, hoping against hope that Mary went way overboard, too. Yes, I enjoy giving, but I also enjoy receiving. And Mary, if you're listening, there is still plenty of time to go way overboard if you don't feel as though you have really gone way overboard. Mary is more or less getting everything that she asked for this year. More or less. There were some substitutions here and there, and there was one major item that just didn't quite make it on the list this year. Yeah, we've got an anniversary in a couple of months. Maybe it'll make it then. And her birthday's not that far. But before the year's over, she will get everything on her list. Mary presented a reasonable list. I did not present a reasonable list this year. I will not be getting everything on my list because it was incredibly long, filled with all different kinds of options. Didn't expect everything on my list. I have utterly no idea what I'm going to be getting. I have no idea at all. There's a brand new stocking hanging up on the chimney, placed there with care from my sister-in-law, Sally. It's filled with all different shapes and examples of bears, Christmas bears. You see, I love bears. I fancy myself somewhat of an expert on bear. As a matter of fact, there's even a new bear in the box this Christmas. It's a music box that pops up like an old Jack-in-the-Box, except it has a bear. Santa has stopped by a number of times already this season. Unfortunately, we keep missing him when we're together. I mean, just the other day, Mary came home from the grocery store, and she was coming in the front door as Santa was going out the back, and I was saying, "Bye, Santa, see you in a couple of..." And she came charging through the house, and just in time to miss Santa and the sleigh going up through the trees, and you could hear the bells, but you couldn't. And the same thing's happened when I've come in the house. And I missed Santa. I don't understand why he never is there when both Mary and I are there, but he's definitely been there several times already this year when I was alone, and several times when Mary was alone, and maybe next season, maybe next Christmas. We have already cheated at my place and opened up a couple of the presents. I have to admit it. We opened up the presents from Iowa, not the presents that we bought for each other. I got this really neat gumball machine that's already over by my computer on the desk. And so Christmas number 44 hasn't really happened yet, but it has already started. Probably the best place to start would be Christmas number 1. I don't really remember my first Christmas. I wish I did, but I don't. I was 86 days old. I was born September 30th, 1945. But my mom or my dad, I'm not really sure which, possibly both, or maybe somebody else, who knows, decided to document my first Christmas. And there is this professional 5x7 hand-colored photograph of this little baby that looks just like anybody else's little baby, sitting in a high chair next to a Christmas tree that is just covered with tinsel. And they tell me it's me. I don't see that photograph very often. I run into it maybe once every 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. It's kept in a box with a christening outfit. It was made for my mother's wedding dress, and there's some pictures in there of her wedding and 1 or 2 other very precious things, and the box doesn't get opened very often. But when it does, there's little Bobby. It says right on the back, "My Bobby, first Christmas, 1945. I don't really remember a great deal about Christmas until the age of 4. That would have been 1949. You see, I was an only child, and I was the child who was born right at the end of the Second World War. to two families. My mother's side of the family were the Irish Catholics. My father's side of the family were the Eastern European Catholics. I was the first grandchild. I was the first nephew. I'm literally at the head of the baby boom. When everything was going to be great and grand and there would never be war again and everybody would be peaceful and prosperous forever and ever and ever more. And babies were a very special thing. There weren't an awful lot of babies born during the war. And it took a while for the real baby boom to kick in, and I was right there. I was the one that you bought presents for and spoiled. Loved it. It was a great time to be alive as a baby. I remember 1949. Oh, do I remember 1949. Christmas morning. It was a two-bedroom house on Maple Avenue, 128 Maple Avenue in a little town called Woodland, New Jersey. It was right in between Camden and Collingswood. It was a red brick row house. I had the back bedroom. The upstairs hall was not really much of a hall at all. It was just a little place barely big enough to turn around. The front of the house was the master bedroom. The back of the house was my bedroom and the bathroom. Now, I was a good kid, considering that I was spoiled viciously by all of my aunts and uncles. And I was told that no matter what, when I woke up in the morning, I was not to go downstairs. And this particular day, when I went to sleep, it was really reinforced. No matter what, when you wake up tomorrow morning, you do not go downstairs by yourself. Under the pain of death, I would imagine, said my mother as she put me to sleep that night. I couldn't quite understand why. She'd been in remarkably good spirits for weeks on end. It was the most extraordinary year of my life. One day, a couple of weeks before this morning that I'm about to speak of, I was playing in my room upstairs, and there was a knocking sound downstairs. My mother was downstairs ironing, but it was kind of like a hammer. And she called upstairs and she said, "Did you hear that?" And I said, "Yes, what? Yes, I heard it. I didn't do it." And she said, "Well, you better come down here. There's something very strange." And I went downstairs, and there was something called a Christmas stocking. Didn't look like anything you would wear, but it was kind of in the same basic shape, that was now tacked to one of the radiator covers. And we didn't have a chimney to tack your stocking to with care. And she said, "Well, Santa Claus must have been here." And I said, "Santa Claus?" I hadn't met Santa Claus yet. I was going to go a little bit later on in a week or so to meet Santa Claus. He was working over in Lit Brothers in Philadelphia, a department store. And I said, "Santa Claus was here?" And she said, "Yes, he hung up the stocking. It must be for you. It says Bobby on it." And it was a day or two later. I was lying in bed one afternoon, just either starting or finishing my nap. I'm not really sure which. I mean, come now, it was almost 40 years ago. Give me a break. And my mother called upstairs again, and she said, "Did you hear that?" And I said, "Hear what?" And she said, "Shh, there it is again." She said, "The jingle bells. Did you hear them?" I didn't. And a day or two later, while I was getting ready to go to sleep, and again laying in my darkened room, my mother came up and opened the door, and she said, "Did you hear that?" And I said, "What?" And she said, "Shh, there it is again. The jingle bells." And I said, "Yeah, I think I did." Heard those damn bells every year since. I know I heard them. And some prancing of some hooves on the roof. I heard those too. I know I heard them. My mother wouldn't lie to me about something like that. And besides, I heard them. No question about it. A few days after that, perhaps the most important day in my life. Certainly one of the most terrifying. My grandmother took me on a public service bus from Camden, New Jersey, to downtown Philadelphia, 8th and Market. You have never seen anything like this in your entire life. I had never seen anything like this in my entire life. There were these gigantic buildings. They must have been 400 and 500 stories tall. There were more people on the streets than I had ever seen in my life. There were trolley cars and subway cars and buses and regular cars and then she took me to see the guy that was to become a lifelong friend. His name was Santa Claus. He seemed to have one hell of a lot of friends. There were boys and girls just lined up, it seemed forever, to talk just for a few minutes with this man. I, of course, like most of them, was somewhat afraid. I'd never seen him before, and he didn't look like anybody I had ever encountered. He had this great big long white beard and this long white hair, and this was long before hippies. And he wore this red velvet suit with white fur trim, and he laughed a lot, and he had these shiny black boots on, and whew, what an imposing man. My grandmother told me that he knew me already. Even before I got up there, he was going to know. He knew everything about me. He knew when I was good. He knew when I was bad. He knew when I took my nap. He knew when I didn't. He knew when I drank my milk. He knew when I didn't. He knew when I complained about going to bed at night. He knew when I didn't. He knew it all. But she told me not to be afraid, that he was a kind man, he was a gentle man, he was a generous man, and that I would come to like him. Remember that picture I spoke of Bobby's first Christmas? There are 3 photographs that have survived with me these 43 years. Bobby's first Christmas, that Christmas in 1949, when I finally did get a chance to meet my lifelong friend, and a photograph was snapped of it. And another photograph of a year after that in the same situation. I've misplaced one of them this year. I'm heartsick about that. I don't understand people who doubt Santa Claus. I just don't understand that. This man is as real can be. I have known him personally since 1949. That's 39 years. He has been my devoted friend for 39 years. He has never, ever, ever let me down. And I've got the pictures to prove he's my friend. Christmas morning. My mother told me not to go down those stairs no matter what. Really piqued my curiosity. Sometimes kids can wake up awfully early. Well, I had been going these incredible weeks of stockings and jingle bells and sleighs and this new friend that I made over at Lit Brothers in Philadelphia. And so I was pretty anxious to what was going to be going on when I got up the next morning, and lo and behold, I woke up very early. And I was a very good boy. I went in and informed my parents that I was awake and ready to go downstairs. They informed me they were not awake and were not ready to go downstairs and that I was to wait. And my mother once more admonished me, do not go downstairs. Okay. She didn't say I couldn't look downstairs. So I laid down on the top step and stretched my little neck. And there was just this little itsy-bitsy corner, this little triangular corner between the steps and what was downstairs where the tree was. Oh, my God. I'd never seen anything like it. It was even better than Toyland. You see, there was my mother's sister, Kate, my mother's sister, Marie, my mother's brother, Jack, obviously my mother and my father, my father's sister, Irene, all of my father's buddies in the band, and all of my father's buddies who he worked with, and those buddies who he'd been in the Navy with, you know, when they were fighting to make the world safe for little kids, had all gotten together along with my grandparents on both sides and filled a room with toys like you can't believe. And mean, there were fire engines and horses and drums and games and balls and sporting equipment and on and on and on and on, and it just filled the entire living room. It was a dream come true. And all of these people were back home from the war now. They were all working. They all had jobs, and the only thing they didn't have was kids. I was the kid. Holy cow. And there was that rubber football from Uncle Jack and Aunt Marie. Aunt Marie gave me a lot of clothes. They were okay. It was unbelievable. I don't know how long I laid on the top of that step. Probably about 87 years, or at least it felt that way. And then when I got downstairs and I started going through all of those toys, there was something else I hadn't even noticed. It was this little miniature town. This little plastic town that had a railroad running round and round it. And a Christmas tree growing out of the middle of the town. And there was this little black box that would make the train go faster or slower. And my father showed me how it works. And there was this little crossing gate that went up and down as the train went by. And there were little cars. And it had been put together with such love. The roads were gravel. The lawns weren't painted on. They were put on with this little flaky green stuff that had to be carefully and placed down and spread out. I can't begin to imagine how long it would have taken. It was probably about a 6 by 8 foot platform. There was this little paper mountain that the train went into and kind of hid the bottom of the tree. Oh, what a day that was. What a day that was. It was one of the very few Christmas days that my grandparents came over to the house, my father's parents. May have been the only one as far as that goes. But I remember everybody sitting around the table except for me. I wasn't at the table yet. I was inside. You see, my father was a part-time musician, and he played in a band, and almost everybody in the band gave me a toy of whatever it was that they played. And everybody was starting to gather around the Christmas table for Christmas dinner, and I was in there playing. As a matter of fact, Joe Vickery was the drummer, and I was playing with Joe's gift. And I was finally separated from Joe's gift and brought to the table and had my Christmas dinner, and I remember it was very good. I've always liked Christmas dinner. I'm kind of fond of drumsticks, you know, and I usually got the drumstick. Being the only kid and all that kind of stuff. I remember eating the dinner and going back into the living room to resume playing with the drum, but mysteriously it had disappeared. That was in 1949. This is 1988, 39 years later. You know, I still haven't found that damn thing. I can't begin to imagine what happened to it. It seems to me that also the clarinet disappeared, and one or two others that I could have sworn I had left it. It must have. I suppose the only possible logical explanation is that with all the wrapping paper, my mother must have accidentally mixed it up with the wrapping paper and threw it out when she didn't really mean to. So many memories of that very first Christmas. I remember the mailman. He was always coming to the door. He'd come 2, 3, 4 times a day, bringing cards from people that were wishing us Merry Christmases and Happy New Years, and were Scotch taped to the wall or the banister or wherever it might have been. Oh, people used to send a lot more cards then, huh? There are all those special foods and the special dishes that they were held in. We had dishes that were only used for Christmas. I have most of them now. They're carefully packed away in a box. Don't need that many dishes. Don't need dishes that fancy anymore, but be damned if I'm going to do anything with them but keep them. They get looked at every now and then. And you know what? They don't even have to be checked in with. I can see them filled with the special candies, and I can see them filled with the special baked goods and treats. There used to be a one great big glass dish. I don't know what happened to it. It was the dish that held the birthday cake. So my grandmother did most of the special baking, and my mother had her own little tradition. Christmas dinner, the dessert was always a big birthday cake because, of course, it was the celebration of the birthday of Jesus. And there was this special plate that was used only once a year, only for that cake that my mother would make. I don't know what happened to it. I'd love to. There were the plastic electric candles in the window. Almost everybody had them. They've disappeared, too. I'd kill for them. Why is it? You never seem to throw away Christmas decorations, but they just eventually disappear. They just eventually are never found anymore. There's so many things that I can see in my mind that I'd literally kill to have again. I would put those miserable, silly-looking candles in the window with all the pride and pleasure in the world if I could only get my hands on them. There were the ornaments that are in that picture that, Bobby's first Christmas. Whatever happened to them? You never throw that kind of stuff away. Never. But there's still an awful lot of Christmases to go. There was one Christmas I remember. I can't tell you for sure what year it would have been. I was either 10 or 11 years old. I had an uncle. He was a priest. His name was Father John Welsh. He had a parish in the northern New Jersey area along the shore. And I hardly knew him. He was really my mother's uncle. He was my grandfather's brother. But he knew my mother, and he remembered her as a small child, and every Christmas he used to send her a small cash gift. Sometimes it would be $5, sometimes $10, and I recall one at $12. Well, this year he had sent the usual gift, and it kind of became tradition that my mother would give me the gift, and then I would turn around and take that money and go out and buy her a gift. And it came that year, and I went out and bought a gift. It was a Lady Schick razor, an electric one. They were all the rage. They were brand new. The gift didn't last until Christmas. I bought it probably about 2 weeks or so before Christmas. And there was this weekend when my mother was deathly ill, really sick. I didn't understand at the time. I came to find out later on that she'd had an abortion. And this was long before abortions were legal. And it wasn't a good one. She was sick. By this time, we had moved away from 128 Maple Avenue, and we were living on 103 Conard Avenue in a 2-bedroom share-the-bath apartment. And of course, she didn't want anybody to know she was sick because she didn't want anybody to know what had happened. And I just remember being so terribly, terribly worried. And I wanted her so much to be better. And so I gave her her Christmas gift a little bit early that year. And I insisted that she open it, and it was this Lady Schick razor in a little powder blue cardboard box with some fake silk inside of it and a place to hide the cord. And the razor was black and had some flowers painted on the disc that was embedded in the center of the razor. It was round. She got better. I never saw her use that damn thing. I never once saw her use that thing. It was usually kept on her bureau. Then I moved away and went on with my life, and she moved several times, and I never saw it again. Until she died. "26 years later, she's still at it." Memories there. Now Now, most memories of Christmas involve people. And there were an awful lot of people. There was Aunt Kate's family. Aunt Kate lived in Audubon. 441 West Graysbury Avenue, I'm pretty sure is the address. The house that Aunt Kate lived in was a house that, remember Father John, Uncle John, the priest? Well, he had bought that house for his mother and his brother, who turned out to be my grandfather, Uncle Mike to the kids, Grandpa to me. And it had been passed on to Aunt Kate and her husband, Uncle Franny. Family had been in that house a long, long, long time. It had been altered several times. It was a nice big house. It was one of those houses built around the turn of the century. It was a wooden frame house, 3 stories, great big full basement, on a good-sized lot. It was a pleasant house. Aunt Kate was an impeccable housekeeper, though no one ever saw her doing anything. Aunt Kate would get up at 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning and clean the house before anybody else got up. They'd get up, breakfast would be on the table, Aunt Kate would be all dressed with her makeup on, and she'd sit there for the rest of the day and not do a damn thing except watch television. But her house was always spotless. It didn't make any difference when you went to see her. As long as it wasn't, I guess, about 4 o'clock in the morning, then you would have probably caught Aunt Kate with a messy house cleaning it. Now, Aunt Kate had 5 kids who survived. Aunt Kate and Uncle Franny were very good Catholics, even though Aunt Kate was not a good broodmare. She kept losing them left and right. But 5 of them survived. There was Eileen. Eileen was 2 years younger than me. She was the second child born in the family. Eileen was an incredibly talented young woman. She was also an incredibly beautiful young woman with one minor problem. She had a horrible birthmark on the left side of her face. Horrible. It made her very shy and withdrawn. She would try very hard to hide the birthmark with her hair, but was almost to the point where to do that she had to comb her hairs so that half of it would have come over to her nose, which made her look all the more ridiculous. But she was a very, very talented young woman. Loved to draw. Even at the age of 5 and 6 and 7 years old, Eileen would be sitting in a corner drawing. There was Michael. Michael was the most angelic-looking boy you can begin to imagine. He was 2 years younger than Eileen. Michael ended up in jail. He sure looked good. Oh, what an angel. There was his brother Richard, who was a year younger than Michael. Michael was a small, frail boy. Richard was a big boy, with a deep, husky voice, again, even as a small child. There was Jimmy, 2 years younger than Richard. Jimmy looked a lot like Michael. I lost track of Jimmy when he went into the Army. I don't know if he followed in his brother Michael's footsteps. He was also a very angelic-looking boy. And there was Rosemary, the baby. It was quite a household. We would spend most of our Christmases, as I was growing up, Christmas days would be spent over at Aunt Kate's. Grandpop Welsh, my mother's father, lived there too. And in the afternoon, after the meal was eaten, Aunt Marie, another sister, and her husband, Joe, who strangely enough happened to be the brother of Kate's husband, Franny. I know this is all very confusing. They would come over with their 4 children, again, another fine Catholic family. Now, Marie was not a good housekeeper, and it didn't make any difference what time you went to Marie's house. That house looked lived in, being as polite as I know how to be. And Marie was loud. Oh! Woman was always screaming at the top of her lungs, "Joey, put that down!" Joey was the oldest. He was a quiet boy, and one of those children that you would say, the only thing you could possibly say about Joey was that this boy was beautiful. Never really seemed to be doing anything bad, but he was always getting hollered at, just like his brother Gary, who was a year or so younger than him. Gary was They call it slow. Gary was injured at birth. He had a leg that wasn't quite straight and a mind that wasn't quite quick enough. He was a good kid. And then there was Tommy. Tommy was loud and assertive, took after his mother. And then there was Patty, Marie's baby. She was born cross-eyed. You see, I don't know what it was about Marie and Joey, but it was a family that just constantly had medical problem after medical problem after medical problem. And Joe, the husband, he was a bricklayer, and he didn't work all that much, and especially in the winter, especially around Christmas. And it always seemed as though Marie and Joe were having a real tough time. And it was always complicated with medical problems, and everybody in the family did the best they possibly could to help make Marie and Joe's Christmas as good as it should be. Which took a lot of special effort. It took a lot of sacrifice. But they were part of the family, and it was Christmas. And damn it, that's what Christmas was all about. Now, I don't ever recall my tree not having a lot of presents underneath it. I don't ever recall Kate and Franny's tree not having a lot of presents under it. Nor do I ever recall Marie and Joe's, but it seems more often than not that Marie and Joe's tree was made full of presents underneath it with the help of a lot of other people, which made Christmas extra special. It's the way it's supposed to be. It's supposedly what it's all about, isn't it? Also, somewhere along the evening, Joe and Franny's father, Grandpa Potts, would show up. I never really knew this man. The only time I ever saw him was on Christmas. He loved to drink beer. And he wouldn't show up until around 5 or 6 in the afternoon, and he'd usually have 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 beers under his belt by then. And he'd sit around for the next 2 or 3 hours, and his boys, Joe and Franny, would keep bringing him beers, and he just sat there with a big smile on his face. And that's the only time I ever saw him. He really never said anything. Grandpa Welsh, he didn't drink. He didn't even talk. So he sure as hell didn't talk to Grandpa Potts, who wasn't really my grandpa, but I had to call him Grandpa because we didn't know what else I should call him. But I'm getting way ahead of myself. After that first Christmas that I really can remember, the one with all of the toys, a pattern set in that was continued for a number of years. See, Christmas was 2 days in my family. It was Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, and Christmas Eve after that first Christmas was spent at my father's parents' house, Grandma and Jaji. Grandma was a huge woman, the best cook in the whole wide world, by the way. She came to this country when she was 8 years old from Eastern Europe. She came through Rikers Island, eventually settled in Philadelphia, in literally a ghetto, where she met my grandfather, who came here when he was 16 as a tourist and became an illegal immigrant and stayed. And he ended up in this ghetto in Philadelphia, where they opened up a candy store and where my father was born, and where they lived until my father was 10 years old. My father didn't speak English until he was 10 years old because no one in this ghetto spoke English. And they eventually moved to Camden, New Jersey, and they too had a red brick row house, except this was an immense one, far bigger than the one my parents had. And it was also at the end of the row. And they had a double yard and a garage. And it was a fun house. It was built like houses used to be built. There was a formal parlor, then kind of a living room, a great big dining room, and then finally the kitchen, all in a straight row. There were 3 bedrooms upstairs, and a rather extraordinary thing, as I recall, 2 bathrooms. But there was something even more extraordinary. Downstairs in the basement, my grandfather, who was a carpenter and a paper hanger and a real do-it-yourselfer, had turned the basement into a bar. It looked just like a commercial bar, with a draft for the beer and the lights and the whole bit. And it was fun to play down there. Oh, you could get down there and play for hour after hour after hour. I loved that house, and I loved that house extra special much on Christmas Eve. On Christmas Eve, that house just danced with lights and music and those special dishes I talked about, filled with special candies and special baked goods. And in the living room, there was a tree. My grandparents were the first people I ever knew who had an artificial Christmas tree. This was back, I guess, in 1950. A 6-foot, rather dumb-looking artificial Christmas tree, but the rest of the house, every room, even the bedrooms, were decorated with Christmas decorations. But the most special room was the dining room. They had this very, very large, hand-carved, almost medieval-looking dining room set. Gigantic, with a crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling. Now, these were working-class people. These were blue-collar people. These were immigrants. But they liked to live well. They were very pretentious people. They had crystal, not cut glass, crystal. They had sterling, not plated, sterling. And it was all brought out for Christmas. As a matter of fact, it was brought out every Sunday, but it was really brought out for Christmas. These are factory workers who had a coffee pot that they perked their coffee in. Then they took the coffee and then poured it into a sterling coffee pot to pour it into a cup. My grandmother would work for weeks preparing that meal. It wasn't really a meal so much as a table. Just a table full of foods that were only really served at that time of the year, especially the baked goods. But there was one thing in particular that came every Christmas Eve that to this day, a tradition that I will never let go of. Ham and potato salad. Not anything special. A very, very simple potato salad recipe that is basically potatoes, mayonnaise, onions, and celery, period. And a Polish ham, a Polish canned ham that wasn't even always warm. I don't know why. I never asked questions. Still served in my house. It always will be. It means Christmas, and it will only be served on Christmas Eve. Jaji, my grandfather, Jaji is kind of like saying Gramps, I guess. Would properly be said, I think it's Jadik if I were trying to say grandfather, but Jaji is kind of a kid's way of saying Gramps. Jaji only had one leg. He had lost one right after I was born. Had a wild accent. Here's a man from Eastern Europe, but he had an Italian accent because the man who taught him to speak English in this country was an Italian. And he looked just like Anwar Sadat. Honest. He probably wasn't the best dad in the world. Probably wasn't the best grandfather in the world. He was a very quiet man. He rarely spoke. He had 2 children. My father, Henry, and his sister, Irene. Now, Irene was absolutely a classic first-generation American. Always trying to be a social climber. My father, a very handsome man, was a classic, hard-working dad. Always had a couple of jobs going. Never had any hobbies, never had any interests, never watched the television. All he wanted to do was work and pay the bills. And Christmas Eve was spent with that side of the family for a number of years when I was a small boy. They had a magical house, as I've already told you about. They also had a magical yard. I would find it very tacky now, but they had a lot of those cement things in their yard, a lot of those poured cement ducks and geese and bird baths. Just loved to play out there, even in the cold of a Christmas Eve. Christmas Day was spent at home at 128 Maple Avenue. Things would change, though. In 1954, my parents separated, eventually to divorce, a very unpleasant divorce. There would be no more Christmas Eves at my grandmother's house at 928 Morton Avenue, or Morton Street in Camden. There would be no more of those tables with all the sterling and all the crystal. No more chandeliers. Grandpop Welsh spent all of his time and energy and his money in a campaign that went on year-round that culminated around Christmas. A campaign of paying for and distributing and getting people to put up posters saying, "Put Christ back in Christmas." It's literally what he spent his year doing. I can't ever remember getting a toy or any kind of a gift from Grandpop Welsh. You'd always get a card with a $5 bill in it. But he never bought anything for anyone. There was never anything personal from him. But he was Grandpop, and we loved him. His kids weren't quite as enthusiastic about him as his grandchildren were. He was a religious fanatic. There's just no other way to put it. That's all he lived for, was his religion. He was a cold, uncommunicative man. But he was Grandpop. And he would at least be there smiling on Christmas Day. You see, Aunt Kate and Uncle Franny and Grandpop Welsh and that side of the family, they were anything but what the other side of the family were. They were very, very plain, simple, humble people and probably had more money. Where my father's side of the family were very complex, very not prestigious, but very, pretentious people. With the linen and all the other stuff I told you about. Well, Christmas at Aunt Kate's after the divorce and separation was a madhouse. There were all of these kids. I was an only child, but I found it rather interesting, to tell you the truth. All of those toys, all the commotion. On Christmas Day, there would be a minimum of 10 children in this relatively small house, along with all of the adults. There was a problem. Aunt Kate didn't want her children to know about divorce. So I had to lie about where my father was, and every year Aunt Kate would call me aside and say, "Bobby, you know that the boys," I don't know why she never referred to Eileen and her sister Rosemary, but the boys don't know about Aunt Betty and Uncle Henry, my mom and dad. And I have told them that your father is a cowboy, and he's out rounding up Indians, because they can understand that, and I would appreciate it if you would go along with the story. Years later, I would resent Aunt Kate for that very, very much. I don't quite understand why she didn't want her children to live in the real world. And I don't understand why I had to lie to my cousins. But other than that, the Christmases were good. Aunt Kate was a pretty fair cook, thank you. She wasn't a fancy cook like I remember my grandmother. At least her food wasn't presented in a real fancy way. Everybody laughed about Aunt Kate's gravy. It looked awful. I mean, it was this yellowish, gravy. But my God, it was good. It was the best turkey gravy I've ever had. And even though you almost had to, control yourself as you were ladling it on, your potatoes and your turkey and whatever else you wanted to ladle it on, boy, when it came time to eat it. Now, Aunt Kate, who I told you we never saw cleaning house, never ate either. I don't know how many meals I had in that house. She always sat at the table, but she never ate. I've never seen this woman eat. Uncle Franny always carved the turkey. I, to this day, am very envious of him. I can't carve a turkey. But he always seemed to carve it just perfectly, just as much as was needed. Never any more, never any less, and it always worked out perfect. One Christmas in particular, I remember the boys got one of those road racing sets. God, how I loved that. I loved going over to their house. They had a lot more toys than I did because they were younger than me. By this point in the game, I was starting to get a lot of sweaters and shirts and, you know, the kind of stuff that you get when you're 12 and 13 and 14 years old. I never did get to go back to a Christmas at 928 Morton Street in Camden, where the dressmaker and the carpenter, my grandmother, my grandfather, where they lived. My dad, the tool and die maker and part-time accordion player, suddenly became less and less a part of Christmas. My mother, the telephone operator, became more and more a part of Christmas.